Ricardo Semler, after the amount of time that you've put into it, can you say with certainty that it really is possible to establish a truly democratic workplace in the modern world?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if I went back to the company today and said, do these 5,000 people look like exactly the kind of people with the kind of happiness that I'd like to see, enthusiastically getting up on Monday morning and going to work? And say, no. Do they have enough power to actually change alone the path of this or that? Probably not. But it's an experiment that after 25 years and 25 years of growth in all kinds of conditions demonstrates that it's a much more stable mechanism for people working together than the traditional business model.
Have you had to make more compromises with your original ideal for Semco as the company has grown?
Every time we grew very much, we had to go back a little bit in our process. We would then pick up a little bit more. But I would say that in the first 3-4 years, back then, we already made the compromise that were necessary to human nature. And the fact that a lot of the idealism behind let's all do this together and so forth was lost. But the process and the architecture of an organization that can survive a new world, that one didn't have to be compromised.
Well, we might just quickly move through a few basic areas and test how democratic a process it is. To what extent is management chosen by workers, elected?
There's no process other than being anonymously evaluated by your subordinates. So there's no process by which I, for example, could choose someone without first having that person be interviewed by his or her future subordinates. So in that sense, it's a process that's that can't be diverted by management power.
So if his or her subordinates gave the thumbs down, that person would not get the job?
They would not get the job at all, no. There's no chance of someone being... People will be interviewed for a management job, sometimes by dozens of future subordinates before they actually get the job, and they'll do it 2, 3, 4, 5 times, so that by the time the person's finally hired, everyone knows everything about it.
So how often do they get it wrong? That is, the subordinates, when they're choosing a future boss?
We like to think that they get it wrong less often than do in other companies, I'm not sure, but I think so because when you look at our turnover, which is less than 1% a year, you look at the people who score 90-something out of 100 in management positions, who have been in the same position for 19 years, 22 years, re-elected every 6 months. It's a sign that probably there's more stability in the system.
And what about how you arrive at a salary level for any individual worker?
Basically, we as a company, we know how much people make inside, outside, and how much we can afford. People know other things as what do they need? What would they like to have at this point in their lives? What do other people make doing other things? And no one has all of these things together. So we give them these three. And we say to everyone, look, this is what everyone makes in the company. Here's what the company makes in its profit margin. And here's what people make at other competitors. Now, you have everything it takes to tell me what your salary should be. Now, people's first reaction is to say, oh, okay, I'm going to multiply it by 10. But the fact is that in these 6 monthly budget meetings in which people put together their future, also anonymously, we decide whether Kerry O'Brien is worth $8 million a year or not. And the fact that you think you're worth $8 million might not coincide with ABC's opinion, and if it does not...
I think my opinion would be somewhat lower than that.
But no, my opinion of you is good. Now, what I'm saying is that what will happen is that it won't stick. And so people say, look, I think he's worth that, and he's fantastic, but maybe at BBC in London, not here. And so the person is out of a job. And so there's a self-regulating process.
So they take that into account in advance.
Yeah.
And perhaps then some people would err on the side of caution and pay themselves less than perhaps they're really worth.
Yes, and then they find over time they're not making ends meet, or that those two things, that people are making more and have a better car and have a better this, and then they slowly up it again.
You offer plenty of examples of how the Semler way has worked, but what are some of the things that haven't worked?
Things that were where we underestimated human nature in terms of our thinking that if we as an island were able to change things, that the world would change accordingly. So for example, the process whereby when we look at our lives, we see that we spend 25% of our time studying, 35 to 40% working, and now 25-30% of our time retired. There's something very wrong with this process. And so we tried to fix it a little bit. And if you look at it, you see that there's a bell curve of availability of money in your pocket. it goes like this. And you look, and there's a U which says availability of time to use that money. And health is doing this in a declining fashion. So it's a very stupid exercise the way we live our lives. Because at the moment you have the most money, you don't have the time. When you have the time, you don't have the money or the health. And so we started a process, for example, where people can take their Wednesdays off to retire. It's called Retire a Little. And so we say, on Wednesday, you retire. And what you were going to do at 82 was garden or surf or mountain climb, you do this Wednesday. And we'll sell you your Wednesday back at 10% of your salary. So you can take some of that money and you can buy some of that time. But these are the kind of things that when done in isolation are very strange and take time to work and sometimes don't work because people find it very strange to spend their Wednesday on the beach and looking around at 11 o'clock in the morning, there's no one else there.
And I suppose you're saying that because you're only charging them 10% for that 1 day off out of 5, you're actually subsidising their early 1 day of retirement a week.
And also because we're saying we don't want to buy time anymore. It's a very silly concept to say we want you here at 9, we want to see you can leave after 6. We're buying talent nowadays, right? How are we going to compete? How is Australia or how is Brazil going to compete with Thailand at 20 cents an hour and so forth? Is it by showing up at the right time? By putting in more hours? It can't possibly be that. We need to buy talent instead of time.
Your most recent book you called The 7-Day Weekend. Surely that's a bit of a misnomer because it implies that we can have fun all the time and not have to work.
Yeah, smart American editors, but it's tongue-in-cheek. But it was originally called The End of the Weekend. But the whole rationale, of course, is the following. You look at it, you say, oh, I work Monday to Friday, but then on Saturday and Sunday I do what I want, which isn't true anymore. You're taking your kid to soccer by 10 o'clock. You're going to your mother-in-law for lunch. If you don't show up at the right time at the dinner reservation, you've lost the reservation. And this is how your weekend is structured. No one has any more idle time. And without idle time, you don't rethink anything.
But we have that kind of structure around the whole of society, don't we? I mean, whether you have the Wednesday as a bonus or a semi-bonus and still have your weekends, it is, in a sense, unless you're very lucky or very clever, going to be structured for you often. I mean, your children are going to be going to a school, you've got your various other obligations, as you say.
And that's why we've also, the Semco Foundation, for example, has gone into schooling now, and we have now 2 to 14-year-olds in schools where they don't have to go to class if they don't want to, where their vacation periods are variable, and they take them with their parents whenever they want. So what we're saying is it's possible to contaminate the whole system and undo it as well.
So tell me about the school system. How well does it work? What is the evidence that it works? What are the goals?
Now, 20 days ago, Bill Gates announced that Microsoft, after looking at 100 and something countries, chose 12 schools around the world, and one of them is ours in Brazil, as schools of the future that they're going to try and empower, et cetera, et cetera. There, what we're saying is the following. When you look at your past and my past and anybody's past and say, when did we actually learn something? It was when you were very interested at that exact moment, and there was somebody who was passionate on the other side. Never in any other situation. And so our answer is the following. Do I want a kid who I said to sit down and shut up? Do I want him there? What is the chance that he's going to retain any knowledge? It's very small. So we say, show up when you want to. And when you want to, you will earn enough for all of that time when you would have rather been surfing or playing soccer. And it's very difficult for people to accept. BBC television just went down to film this. And there's a whole area where you can watch DVDs and play video games the whole day long instead of going to class. And so they set up their cameras there. I said, their kids must be here. But the kids don't stay there for very long because there's only so long you can watch video game before it gets boring. And then at a certain point in time, they come back. And if you make it interesting, for example, our courses are not geometry or physics. Our course is setting up a bicycle. So it's a 3-month course. And you start from scratch and you design a bicycle. To design a bicycle wheel, you need pi. And pi is 3.1416. But if I tell you pi is very important, you think it's an apple pie, right? Yeah. Now, if you want to set up you want to do your own bicycle, the only way to make a perfect circle so that thing does not bounce is if you learn pi. And so we set up these courses, and we have chemistry in the kitchen, and we find a different way of saying, this is very interesting stuff. It's just that we made it so boring, and we divided it into disciplines, and we made your life so terrible that you hate it. But you shouldn't hate it. It's wonderful to know how a life works.
Well, let me put this to you, though. You come up with a concept for work, which you find terrific. You apply that concept to school, which you also find terrific. But your work concept has not taken over the work culture around the world, has it? I mean, you have been out and about for 15, 20 years selling your message. Why do you think it hasn't struck a bigger chord in the corporate world?
I think for the same reason that the educational won't either. But I would love to write a book about it and talk about it and just keep poking people a little bit because it's a way of feeling that there's a contribution left. But it does not because it requires a leap of faith in the loss of control. During some time, you've lost control. During some time, if you're a school director and principal, for some time when you say to your kids, you don't have to come to class, they do not, for months at a time. And if you don't stick it out for months at a time, they don't come back. And if you stop after a month, you say, see, I told you this doesn't work. And so with business, it's the same. The people who are in the corporations are the people who are the tough ones, the ones who get up earlier, the ones who don't care that their kids, that they haven't heard from them for a long time, don't know how they're doing in the rest of their lives, because this is more important. They're making money for some moment when they're going to spend it, which is never going to come. And so these people are making their way up the organization. They're not about to lose control or to take a leap of faith and loss of control. So I don't think people will take this up.
Do you have any respect for a corporate culture, say an investment bank, a very successful investment bank, where part of the culture is that everybody's at their desk by 7 or 7:30 in the morning, and the one who leaves before 7 at night is regarded as something of an aberration. And maybe they do make big profits and they get big bonuses. So why isn't that culture a symbol of success to you?
It's basically a military culture. When you think, what's the difference between Colin Powell and Jack Welch? Are they not interchangeable? Sure they are. In an MBA or somebody from West Point, we talk about military terms all the time. We say, our business has this strategy, we're going to outflank them, we're going to fire this person. This is the whole rationale. So when you take an investment bank and you say, show up here, do this and that, you say, at the end, they made lots of money. And my question is, they made lots of money and they were happy with that? And you look and you say, cite, give me 10 investment bankers that that are really happy, that have a good family life, that really love their kids. It's not the same people, right? It's people who made a lot of money and then they shove this money around and they buy helicopters and they do crazy things and then they lose it. How many investment banks do you know from the 70s that you can tell me are now in the same ranking as they were 20, 30 years ago? They don't last. The whole thing lasts a short while, and then they're bought by UBS, who is bought by SBC, who then breaks this, and then one kid at ING Barings can undo the whole system, right? And what's there, you say, is that an example of life? It's nothing that anybody likes to look at an investment bank and say, here is how I'd like to live my whole life.
This is also the age of the MBA, isn't it? That MBAs are seen as a kind of necessary prerequisite on the road to the top. Again, what respect do you have for that kind of thinking?
Very little. I mean, I've stopped now, but I've been teaching MBA at MIT and at Harvard. In both places, I look at those MBAs and I say, I want you to look at the reading material here, and you're going to find Kafka and Marco Polo and Freud. I don't want to teach about Peter Drucker and strategy of this and that. You can pick up anytime you want. The real question is, how do I keep you at 45 from buying a red sports car and trading your wife for a 19-year-old model? That's an essence of life that we want to talk about. The rest you can learn. It's not that difficult.
And what respect do you have for the business culture, the corporate culture that believes that you have to have a certain amount of fear in the workplace as a motivating force for your workforce?
Which is, again, the military paradigm, because you take a flank of 11,000 Anzac people in Gallipoli, and you say, guys, we figured it's you 11,000 who need to die, okay? And the guy says, actually not, if you were to ask me. And so you say, I'm not going to ask you. And what I'll tell you is the following. If you do not actually go to Gallipoli, I will kill you anyway. The sergeant has orders to execute you if you try and leave. So then it doesn't really matter that you try and run against a few bayonets on the other side, because you're going to be killed anyway. And so that kind of fear in a company says, you show up here, you do your thing, we'll take care of you, which is not true. It's a fraudulent statement nowadays. We can't take care of you. We don't know that this job is going to Thailand within 2 years. And you do as I say and you'll be all right. And so the whole concept is already flawed at the very beginning. So there's very little respect for the idea that if I have enough terror, people will do the right thing.
But it might work for a time. And if an individual leaves because they find that counterproductive, in the end there's always somebody else to take their place.
Oh, definitely.
To be fearful and to produce for a time.
Right, and probably the person who most believed in that was Stalin. Right? He was the guy who thought, I'll just run the machinery. And the people will run through the machinery. And if I don't like them, I'll send them to a gulag, or I'll kill them, or they'll leave, and I'll just undo them. But there'll always be enough new people to run through the grinding machine.
But fear is one of the motivating forces in life, isn't it? It's part of the human nature, and it can be a survival mechanism, fear.
When you need it. But again, fight or flight or Margaret Mead, or the whole rationale of, at moments, I will do things because my anthropology, my tribal instincts tell me to do it. Try to do that for 20 years at a time to see whether you can act on fear for 20 years. You can't. You need to change the people all the time.
So how does your company deal with people who aren't delivering in the job?
Again, they have to survive on their own, because every 6 months people put together the list anonymously of the people they think they need. So there's enough fear in the system of the tribal kind anyway, which is for you to adapt, for you to be accepted, etc. You're going to do things which are of human nature. But the moment people say, look, 11 out of 12 of us think that for that salary we don't need you anymore, you're out of a job entirely.
You might be disseminating power a little more through your organisation, but you're not doing away with power completely, are you?
No.
There are power structures, I assume, right through your organisation.
Yeah.
Do you also agree that those who have the power have a natural tendency to want to protect it, to want to protect their own power, whether it's through self-interest or whatever?
They do, and they'll try to preserve it. And we're not trying to do away with human nature or leadership at all. What will happen, though, is that every 6 months, when they're evaluated anonymously by all the people who work below and around them, they're now in trouble, because now they have a parameter which says you used to be an 85 out of 100, you're now a 72. When you become a 60, there's no place for you anymore. So there's only so much you can do with that power before the fact that you're being graded anonymously will solve the issue.
So what happens from here for you? Because I know you've got no great respect either for the 5-year plan. Do you have any idea where you and Semco will be 5 years from now?
No, and I try not to think about it in the sense that it will always be, I think people's futures are always based on wishful thinking. You don't really say, I see myself 5 years from now in a hospital with a tremendous cancer problem. I don't see people looking at themselves 5 years ahead and seeing that, if they don't have the antecedents. So basically, people are wishful thinking. I will be better, the company will be better, I will be happier, I will have more kids, and so forth. So it's an exercise that I think you're not even ready for life if you actually prepare yourself so far ahead that you're actually forced to follow the path that you set for yourself, instead of just watching and realizing that you can take a dramatic right turn and nothing else will happen. I'm coming here from a honeymoon in Samoa, so you never know where your life is going.
When you talk about companies being fraudulent in promising a future to employees when they come to the company, elaborate on that a little more. In what way are they fraudulent?
Basically, they have a self-image which they know is not true, which says, we are a company that has concern for the environment and for the work life and the quality and the product service and the employees and the shareholders and so forth and so on. But that's because it's the only option. There's really nothing else they can say. So when they say, here's a job with us and you will have a long career and we will make you this and that, it's completely fraudulent, because company life cycles are now so short that the chance that they're not there, they've been merged, they've been transferred to another country, outsourced, is so enormous statistically that the idea that you're offering something stable to someone is already fraudulent in itself. You'd have to say, look, come and let's hope this is going to work, but the chances are very small.
Well, if you find it hard to look forward, let me ask you to look back as a measure of what it is that drives you today. So in each block of time, your company has grown. Your profits have grown. Your own personal wealth has grown. A company that might have had a few hundred now has 5,000. What is it in all of that still motivates you? Is it about the growth? Is it about being bigger and feeling good about yourself because you've grown something like that?
No, as a matter of fact, now we've had a few opportunities to sell to partners our part completely, and I'm very happy to do that, and 1,000 people or 2,000 people will go at a stretch. No, I think I've gotten over that. There's something in the beginning of a career where you find that important. But then you realize that there's nothing in nature that grows indefinitely except cancer. Everything else, and you have the tall poppy syndrome rationale here in Australia, and the tree that grows most is the one that's first struck by lightning. There's the idea that you grow more, you have more money, and you become better is a very, very silly idea. And so What takes me, let's say, from business to education or to dealing with 2-year-olds is that I'm interested in human nature and why we do some of the silly things we do if there's not a better way to do this.
Well, I don't think you'll get bored doing that, Ricardo Semco. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.